Thank you. So this work was done with Nolwenn Maudet and Wendy Mackay, who's also here in the room. And Nolwenn and I will be presenting the paper. If we look at the current interfaces of color pickers, we see that they usually have a representation of a color space and a set of controls and features that allow selecting a color from this representation. If we look back at the initial version of these interfaces, when they were first introduced 25 years ago, we see that they haven't changed much. So, have we solved the problem of digital color manipulation? Well, first, we need to know how color has been studied, both from a system and the user point of view. Unlike mass or volume, color is not just the property of an object. It is a sensation that is triggered by a radiation of sufficient intensity. So whether this radiation is coming directly from a source of light, or whether it's coming from the reflection of this light on a surface, when it comes to the human eye, it is transformed by a set of cells called photoreceptors into a nervous stimulation that is then carried to a specific area of the brain where it is experienced and interpreted as color. In the digital world, one of the very first challenges was representing color on the screen. Thus, we started by having color models that are more related to the devices, such as the red, green, and blue color model. And we moved on to some other color representations that are more intuitive to the human eye, such as the hue, saturation, and value representation. More recent color spaces, such as the CIE lab color space, are perceptually uniform, and thus they draw more from principles of human perception and cognition. In terms of systems and tools, the focus has been more on creating algorithms and tools in order to provide convenient colorizations to help users use the right colors. For instance, Jalal suggested a technique where the user would suggest a value for the hue, and then the system would suggest automatically a value for the saturation and the luminosity according to the properties of the image and the context. Similarly, Meyer presented a color expert system that extracts a set of constraints from a design drawing and then suggests a colorization that is convenient for this drawing. From the user point of view, artists and designers have been working with color for centuries. So Joseph Albers, who has taught several famous courses about color, calls it the most relative medium in art. And he highlights the importance of having really hands-on exercises with paper and with different types of materials with color in order to be able to understand and comprehend color. Similarly, while Eaton really talks and explains elements from color theory, he calls them only a starting point for artists to be able to express themselves through color. So how do artists and designers really interact with color? We conducted a set of critical object interviews with a group of artists and designers where we went to their homes, offices and studios, and we asked them to actually show us color objects they have worked on, and for each object we asked them to explain in details the color manipulation process that led them to create this particular object. From these interviews, we extracted 35 color manipulation stories. In here, we can see that every column is the collection of stories collected from a single participant. So we had from 3 to 5 different stories per participant, and they were all from various artistic and design fields. We had an illustrator, a ceramist, a painter, graphic designers, and product designers. Each story was illustrated using a storyboard that has the color manipulation object the participant was talking about, and that explains in details the different steps of the color manipulation process as explained by the participant. Using grounded theory, we extracted 11 initial categories that articulate the interaction with color as was presented in the stories. Examples of these categories are moving back and forth between digital and physical colors. And more surprisingly, participants also expressed the need of using color as a prototype or a sketch that would articulate the idea that this color is not really final. In the paper, we talk about 5 out of these 11 categories of interaction with color, and we chose these categories because they were more represented in the user stories. The first category is interacting with samples, and it is about picking an initial color and then tweaking the dimensions of this color before applying it to the final object. In this story, the illustrator extracted an initial color from an image, then she used the black dimension in the CMYK color space in order to purify the color by removing the black. The second dimension is interacting with palettes, and it is about manipulating the relationships between colors in context. In this story, a product designer played with several color objects to create several compositions by changing the position, the size, and the contrast among the colors. The third dimension is interacting with composites, and it is about manipulating the external relationship between color and another element, such as texture or light. In this story, a product designer wanted to capture the richness of physical color far beyond the flat colors that she had on the screen, as she literally said. So what she did was that she scanned an actual tablecloth and used the scanned image directly on her final object. The fourth dimension is interacting with history, and it is about moving beyond capturing just the final color, but also the source from which the color was extracted, the final target where it was applied, and the different meaningful steps of the color manipulation process. In this story, a graphic designer actually used the space around his Illustrator document in order to create rectangular swatches that he saved according to the colors he tried along the way. So when saving the document, he would see not only the colors he used at the end, but also the color he tried along the way, as well as the context where he finally ended up applying them. The last dimension is interacting with process, and it's about using color, this time not as a goal, but as a tool for revealing the progress of a particular activity. In this story, a product designer could just show her ceramic pots, and then she could provide an idea about the complexity, the time and the effort that she needed to realize each object. Thus, objects with many color layers required more time and effort compared to objects with only fewer color layers. These interaction activities form the color portraits design space that we evaluated and studied using different methodologies that Nolwenn will be presenting.
So we asked 3 different questions. The first one is, do other users manipulate colors in the same ways, or do those dimensions only apply to artists and designers? To try to find out, we studied the color portrait design space, but this time with scientists and engineers. So we recruited 8 of them, and we used a similar methodology as in the first study. And they were coming from a wide variety of background. So we had a data scientist, a geologist, neuroscientist, and so on. And we had 2 interesting findings. The first one that was very surprising to us is that we were able to collect 34 different stories, which means that yes, scientists and engineers also do manipulate colors in a wide varieties of ways. The second finding that we can read in this table is that, as you can see, on the X dimensions are the participant, and on the Y dimension are the dimensions. And as you can see, we don't have that many gaps remaining in terms of stories. For example, we have for all of the dimensions, at least 5 of the participants had stories involving this color manipulation activity, which suggests that yes, scientists and engineers also have various ways of manipulating color. The second question we have is, how do current tools do support the color portraits design space? And here we decided to choose 6 different tools specified for 3 different types of users. So we chose 2 tools for the general public, so Mac color tools and the word color picker. 2 tools for scientists and engineers, so color brewer and I want hue, and 2 tools for artists and designers, so the Photoshop color picker and Adobe Cooler, which is now Adobe Color. And as you can see on this table, although on the sample dimension, this dimension is quite well supported by almost all the tools, but it remains, like many gaps remains on the rest of the dimensions, which suggest opportunities for the design of innovative color tools. And this leads us to the third question. Is color portraits a generative design space? To try to answer this, we created and then studied 4 novel color manipulation tools based on those dimensions. The way we studied them was by using them as probes with 8 participants, so 4 participants from the first study and 4 participants from the second study. And although we asked for feedback on the tools themselves, here I'm going to focus more on the stories they were able to give us as ways they could appropriate those tools. The first tool is Palette Explorer. It's based on the palette dimension, and the concept behind it is the idea that you can manipulate color not as a single unit, but in the context of a palette. And we do this by using swatches. So we have 3 different ways of manipulating a palette. The first one is by manipulating spatially, so you can rearrange and compose the swatches, change the size, the position, and the layering. The second way you can manipulate a color is by manipulating it directly in context of the other color of the palette. So here we mapped the cursor dimensions with color dimensions. And the last way we can manipulate a palette is by manipulating the whole palette at the same time. So by fixing certain dimension of a color space and moving along other dimensions. When we use this tool as a probe with one of our designers, she said that although she wanted to use this tool as a way to experiment with palettes, she also wanted to use it as a way to experiment with alternatives for layouts for a client website, so a very different way of using it. Our second tool is Color Compositor. It's based on the composite dimensions, and the idea is to be able to manipulate both color and texture at the same time. So here you can blend colors and textures, and then you can manipulate them both at this, differently, but you can see the results on the separate elements or directly on the blended elements. And you can decompose and recompose elements. And for example, when we use this tool as a probe with our painter, it was playing with the oranges texture, and just by changing the color inside it, he was able to create a lemon texture, as you can see. Our third tool is Color Partner. It's based on a history dimension, and there is also the notion of having a user and system partnership in creating colors. So here, the user can select a node, and the system is going to generate nodes based on this. So the closer you are from the original node, the closer the colors are going to be. If you go further, the more different the colors generated are going to be. And we have a second mechanism, that is, if you don't select nodes, they will decrease in size and eventually disappear, but if you do select them, they will increase. So you can see that over time, the tool is really reflecting the color practices of the user. And when we use this tool as a probe, although the colors are really generated by the system, our painter said that he felt he was really owning those colors and that he would not want to share them with anyone else. Our last tool is Color Revealer. It's based on the process dimension, and here the idea is to be able to reveal the writing process through color. So here the user writes type words and letters, and it adds color layers behind. So whenever you are deleting something or hesitating, it will add opacity, and also the color evolves over time, so it really reflects your writing process. And when we use this tool as a probe with our information theorist, what she said is that whenever she was making a typo, she realized that instead of just deleting the letter, she would actually delete the whole word, and she was able to see this through this tool.
So the color portraits design space revealed that the interaction with color is actually far wider than just selecting a color from a color space, which has been the focus of several color tools. The color interaction categories articulated a set of color manipulation needs as expressed by 69 different user stories. The color tools demonstrated the generative power of the color portraits design space to create richer interactions with color. Thank you.
We have some time for questions. All right, well, I can start with the first question. So I dropped my phone and broke my screen, so my timer broke. So I kind of lost track a little bit. But what about just the process of picking just a single simple color? Like I need to alter the highlight color of a PDF viewer or something like that. Do your tools seem a bit more fuller than that? So do they help pick with just a single simple color? I need to rip this off really quick or something like that.
Okay, so yeah, thank you for the question. That's actually included in the first dimension of the color portraits design space, which is the sampling dimension. So that dimension is actually picking a color and then playing with the properties of this color before applying it to the final object, which is a practice that was widely spread among our users. And we actually found out that this dimension was pretty well covered by the existing color tools. So for instance, in Adobe Cooler or now Color, you have the eyedropper tool that allows you to do that, and the Mac OS color tool, you have that. So we kind of like focused on the remaining dimensions for kind of like trying to see if it's possible to generate color tools that allow supporting these dimensions.
Hey, so I apologize if you mentioned it, maybe I missed it. There's a variety of online tools for defining palettes for web design and app design. Have you looked at that? Do they show some of the properties you showed?
Yes, definitely. Thank you for the question. So we looked at several of the online existing tools, and we actually tried to, we actually studied one of them, which is the Adobe Color tools, that has the ability to provide palettes. And in our study, we actually had 3 levels for looking at these particular tools. So we first saw if these tools provide ready palettes for the users, which is what some of the tools do, like Brewer, like Color Brewer and other tools. And then we kind of saw if the user can enter his own colors to create palettes that would be kept in this particular tool. And that was something that was actually supported by the Adobe Color online tool. And then when we moved to the other part, where it was about actually manipulating the properties of the elements in this palette, such as the size of the swatches, the layering among the swatches, and their position, which really mattered for our users, we did not find online color tools that supported that.
Also, the third dimension, that is being able to manipulate the whole palette at the same time, that is something we actually found out in one of our user story. And it was like, okay, I would have an already defined palette. I would keep the luminosity and the saturation property of this palette, and we just change the hue. It will create a completely different palette, but it will like keep some kind of the relationships among them. So that was something we wanted to implement because we never found this ability in some other tools.
Hello, Sonjun Kim from GUIs. So is there any place, any room for color recommendation or personalization in your process?
Thank you very much. That's a very good question. Actually, we haven't done much work on this, but that's true that we are continuing on the tools, and we want to make them better and have more diversity, and this is clearly something we want to include, like the possibility to recommend and share colors.